Greetings, everybody, and welcome once more to the Dracovin Empire. Are you ready to dive into the world of darkness once again? Going into the shadows, learning of another werewolf, Garou. We're going to be learning about an extinct, a lost tribe, the Bunyip, today. You're ready to learn about them, though I am your host and guide, Dracovin. I will lead you through a portal, through a gate, to the world of darkness, where we can learn about the Bunyip. Just have to grab my hand and make sure to leave a little bit of a tip before we leave. Make sure you're subscribed over on the YouTube side of things and do all the various YouTube things for the algorithm. We'll talk about your comments at the end of today's video. Are you ready to go? The world of darkness awaits. Let's get going. We have once more arrived. We are in the modern day, though, but we're going to be learning about someone lost and the interesting story of that loss. The Bunyip. Now, the Bunyip, well, I can say if you're looking into them yourself, there are three sources I would point out. First off, hey, the Australia book. Yes, Rage Across Australia, it deals with that. Now, that is a much more modern take on things, but it does hint at some of the, basically, legacy of the Bunyip. And, basically, I will tell you that there was possibility for more books, but we'll get into that at the end of the video today. There's also the core rule books. I'm saying the W20 book here because that's the version of it I was using for my information on Bunyip, but any of them provide that. And more interestingly enough, what's that last one there? Yeah, that's a, one of the, basically, Wild West werewolf books. If you were unaware at all, basically, this is a thing that was done. We did Wild West Werewolf. It's kind of like Vampire and Mage Dark Ages. There might have been a Werewolf Dark Ages too, but that wasn't as exciting as Werewolves. And there's the Wild West Companion book, which does deal with some Bunyip because, as we'll talk about, some of them did travel to the Wild West for reasons, which maybe we'll explore. The Bunyip. Who are they? They're an interesting group of Garou that is now extinct. They were often seen as Fera, but they are a tribe of Garou. Basically, they found a way to mix their human kinfolk with the Aboriginal tribes of Australia, but they switched because Australia did not have any kind of wolf species to the animal kin of the marsupial thylacines, the Tasmanian tiger, if you're unaware from their more common name. We will talk about this, or Tasmanian wolf is sometimes called, a little bit more before the end of today, their kin in other ways, but we'll leave it there. Their totems are two different ones, and this does reflect different versions, but the different versions are kind of combined together, that they have the totem of Bunyip itself and Rainbow Serpent. And again, it's one of those things is, if you're going by the W20, it does talk about having both of them, but they were both established in different parts of that kind of thing, of the different totems. Rage Across Australia was saying Rainbow Serpent, the Wild West, through 20th anniversary it said Bunyip, but 20th anniversary was like, acknowledged both of them. So, yeah. What is the history of the Bunyip? This explains where they came from, if we talk about their history. So, basically, the War of Rage happened. The Bunyip left the rest of the Garou. They traveled. They were kind of a strange, unique tribe, and their ultimate end was with something called the War of Shame. This is when other Garou made war on the Bunyip, believing them no longer to be cousins, drove them to be extinction. They are the only of the lost tribes that died to Garou. So, they arrived in Australia with the first humans that were there. They wished to deeply bond with the land, understand it, protect it. In some retrospect, we're not sure exactly where it came from. We know that they learned from the Mokele. Now, there is word that perhaps it was the Kamazat of Australia that introduced them to the Mokele. There's mixed words of how well they were connected with the Naga of the continent. Some that said they hid their connections with them completely. Others that they were revealed in secret, kind of ostracized. There's a lot of discussions about who they were connected with when it came to the other Fera, the other changing brutes. But we do know that it was the Mokale, at least, that the deal they struck that taught them to change from the wolves that they had known before to the thylacines of this land, in whatever kind of ritual that they learned. They became connected with another dog-like creature, even though, unlike some of the other Garou that are connected with other, canines, this is marsupial. It's way out there. They switched. Now, dingoes did eventually show up in Australia, but with more settlers. But the Bunyip basically did not switch to them as a potential breeding stock because the thylacine were originally from this land. They stuck to it, basically. This is the way they'd found it. This is the original. Yes, dingoes had changed things. This was an adaptation that we kind of understand why they're not connected with dingoes, that they remained with thylacine. It was the original land they connected with. So millennia happened. The rest of the Garou nation didn't know they existed. In Australia, they basically struggled with the spirits of the Umbra, bartered with them, basically walked with the Aboriginal tribes. They weren't perfect stewards. They were subject still to rage, like their other Garou cousins. They had other struggles, but they were very spiritually connected. They had powerful cairns. The Weaver was very weak here, so they focused primarily on fighting the worm. They weren't really as entrenched in tradition as other tribes too. And like their human kin, they wandered following game and hunted the enemy, usually basically roaming far wider radius from their cairns than other Garou would find practical. And with no other Garou, they had to have truces with the others. The Mokale and the Ananasi made for dangerous neighbors, but also were willing to ignore the Bunyip as long as they respected their territories. The Rokia basically ignored the Bunyips. The Nagaha, that's where they kind of very much veiled themselves. Again, if any did contact them, that's up in the air, dependent on lore and addition. They probably would have been kind of outsiders of their group and in small numbers. And if some kind of incident happened, eventually there would be a ceasefire. Basically, nobody wanted to focus on old grudges. Yes, we're post-War of Rage, and the Bunyip have obviously been a different change than the traditional Garou and are willing to negotiate. Other Garou showed up. European settlers. And they brought werewolves with them. And war broke out. The War of Shame happened. Now, the source of the War of Shame is argued in many fronts. Some say it was the Black Spirals influencing from the shadows. Others say it was the Nasi, basically, who had always wanted to get rid of the Bunyip. There are a lot of different ways, but regardless of it, prejudice and, otherism basically resulted in the Bunyip being killed because they had bonded with something different. And they were overrun. They had been much more of a peaceful group. There were plenty that believed that the Garou were no longer of the wolf blood. So, yeah. Their kin fell to European migrants, and the war was lost. The last surviving Bunyip traveled into the Umbra, basically to continue its own fight, and was never seen again. Though you can find angry spirits of Bunyip haunting the Australia penumbra. Basically, if you go in there, and you're a Garou, you might be screwed. They're a little angry about the entire, slaughter us for no apparent reason. Just saying. And isn't to say that there isn't hope, though, in a little ways. We'll talk about all of it, but at very least in the totems, who refuse to aid the Garou nation, they do say that Bunyip and Rainbow Serpent will possibly become patrons once more if the forgiveness can be earned. Basically, it's kind of like with Bat. The Bat needs to be basically purified from the Camisats, and part of it has been by some Garou who have gone on that kind of, hey, we shouldn't have slaughtered off this, Farah. In this case, it's sort of like, hey, we have to make up for this horrible thing we did, and it's probably a good idea to do that. So, yeah. And again, the Bunyip were never in a powerful situation in Australia. They were just basically another people that were there. They never were dominant. They were never the powerhouses there. So yeah, And again, we do know that a few of them made their way to Americas, were living in the West with a fate that was unknown. We know they passed away with the secrets of the Bunyip. We assume they passed away. But here's the thing, though. There could be stragglers like that that had gone to America. With the Wild West book, we know a few Bunyip had been in there. And Werewolf can live a long time. It's not impossible. There's a Bunyip somewhere in America. But again, it's presumed most of them died. Or all of them died at this point in time. And there's another one of those things is traveling there. Why at that point in time? There was a battle going on. I get the feeling that this is me opinions a little bit. Perhaps some of those remaining Bunyips traveled there, get out of what was going on, maybe find peace, maybe find a way to find someone in a far off land that'd be willing to negotiate with them and help gain peace. They were people that preferred peace. But yeah, by the 1930s, the thylacine was extinct, and the Bunyip soon left with it. So, yeah. And of course, though, you know, the Anunnaki have their own problems. There is, in Australia, a creature that formed around the 1900s called the Yowie, which slaughters the Anunnaki, population after the Bunyips went. And perhaps that is because, you know, even if they weren't directly involved in their slaughter, they may have, you know, pushed things along or helped it. You know, the Anunnaki were not really on the sides in this. Yeah. So, they got a problem of their own, basically. Maybe their own creation. So, one final thing. And this relates to some things that are in more modern news as the time of this video coming out. And that is the revival. Basically, in World of Darkness lore, a Children of Gaia geneticist basically was seeking a way to revive the Bunyip and was using some cloned material, some DNA they discovered in 2000, and some basically spirit magics of the Weaver to try to create a thylacine. Yes, this thylacine kind of was a Bunyip, but not really. They were not like Bunyip. They were aggressive, brutal, suspicious, secretive. Basically, they were wasn't the same. You know, even though he was able to recreate these kind of Bunyip with his experiment. There is one of the end of the apocalypse scenarios where these are possessed by worm spirits and drag him down into the black spiral. But again, you know, that's one of the apocalypse scenarios, and whether they're true or not are always up in the air. You know, that's the kind of thing is some of them kind of happens, others didn't. Maybe perhaps because they were kind of lacking a spiritual form, which these two were. They weren't like true Bunyip. They weren't true changing breeds. They kind of did, but they didn't have a lot of that nature of the Garou being weird clones. They weren't perfectly recreations the kind of way. It's kind of like they could clone the physical body, but not the spiritual nature of the Garou. I think that was the entire thing with the technique he had. Anyway, you know, things didn't go well. Anyway, that does leave us to today. Regardless of what happened at the end of that, there are efforts to bring back the thylacine in the year that this video is coming out. And if they're successful, it does mean if you are doing a World of Darkness game and kind of going by the W20 timeline, ignoring 5th edition, they don't really talk about Bunyip in 5th edition, so it's another can of worms that we're not getting into. It's an entirely different thing, and I don't even know how they would handle this with how things go in 5th edition, so that's I don't know. We're kind of leaving that one on the side because it's a weird spot to be in. With the way 5th edition does things, Bunyip shouldn't exist, or they should still exist, and that don't, so it's, I don't know. Anyway, if thylacine come back, maybe you could have a storyline of Bunyip coming back, one of them being kinfolk, finding a way to bring back them. Probably there are those that are descended of the Bunyip amongst the Aboriginal people. And, you know, with both sides returning, spiritually and physically, perhaps Bunyip could return. But again, up in the air. You could also do a horrible corruption storyline like the apocalypse scenario resulted from this. Both directions are probably acceptable. Anyway. Now, I don't have any other good images of Bunyip. I got this War of Rage card and a kind of really weird looking image from earlier editions that I don't think displays them very well. We'll go for that one in a minute here. Let's talk about how Bunyips were organized and a little bit of their culture. So, they tended to be solitary. No major organizations, because they were very much connected with their Aboriginal kinfolk in a lot of ways. And of course, the thylacine too, and their various paps. So these kind of groups made them spread out and be a lot more solitary than others, or a lot more nomadic. So it was probably smaller packs, groups, or individuals that were kind of connected with these kinfolk that would be there. That was kind of how they were divided a lot more. But the other thing is, too, it didn't help them also for fighting back against people that were coming in and fighting them and slaughtering them. It was limited communications. They couldn't organize. And so the invaders had an advantage. They made do in the realm they were in the lives they were living. They adapted to it. It was a different kind of way than other Garou did. In the end, if there was communication, it was smaller. The Bunyip that remained clustered in smaller groups, having their own battles in the Ubra and Garou. Basically, the Bunyip never united as a whole, as maybe another reason why they died off. They were pacifists, spiritualists. They never went out seeking a battle. They fought to survive, protect the ones they loved, but basically the coming of Europeans and more worm powers basically trained their makeup. And they came out as true warriors in the end. They did fight as true warriors. Basically, when push came to shove, they were true Garou warriors. In Hominid, they were Aboriginal people of Australia. In Lupus, they were the thylacine. Go check out pictures of thylacine if you want the Tasmanian tiger, Tasmanian wolf. They were basically more like the modern dingo when they first got to Australia, and basically adapted to the form that they were. The Gumanga, basically the Mokale of Australia, basically helped them to be more like the marsupial thylacine. Effectively, Bunyip probably started out as less canine and kind of adapted into it. And there are other groups that have had similar help, especially from the Mokale. The Mokale, who are creatures of many beings in a lot of ways and many species, know how to adapt to different things. By the time they were considered to be of the Garou, that was too late. And interestingly enough, whether or not it was true, no Metis Bunyip were ever known to exist. Whether that's a cultural thing, a physical thing, or just never, we just never saw it because it was very rare, I don't know. So, there were rare occasions that Bunyip and their human and thylacine kinfolk would come together for a special meeting called a Korobori. I'm probably butchering the way that's said. Apologies. It's a single night. Participants would revel, engage in tribal politics, singing, dancing, storytelling, and initiations, funerals, and later years, councils of war, all in a single night. And again, this is both Bunyip and their kinfolk of both kind. At dawn, the Bunyip themselves would slip away to solitude, although their kinfolk would also remain to continue celebrations. Basically, any unpleasant business that needed to be done at the meeting was done basically after the celebration. They didn't want to disturb the celebration at all. They were very spiritually inclined and spiritual stewards that they took a role of very seriously. And here's another thing. Bunyip rarely needed a focus to enter the Umbra, unlike other Garou. That's how spiritual they were. And frenzies were incredibly rare amongst them. Not impossible, even amongst the warriors of their tribe. Even their warriors held that in very heavily. Wisdom was prized. The cairns that they have, which were important places in Bunyip legends, were open to all Bunyip, all the time. There was no ritual or rite. If you were Bunyip, you could arrive in a cairn and be welcomed. Now, if you were not Bunyip Garou, you could only access them with the rite of outsider rituals. Here's our image. Thanks, older editions. Anyway, so a few other things that we can talk about for differences in trivia before we finish up today. Thanks, early editions. Ways of doing things. Basically, the relationships with Farah have changed between the books and stuff like that. the deeper connections the Thylacine got with the homelands, rather just the lack of kin, the way that the Naga maybe remained hidden or revealed themselves. These are things that altered between it. So there's little bits of lore. They were the first of the Lost Tribes to be detailed in the Werewolf The Apocalypse book in 1992. So that's an important thing too. First, the Lost Tribes. They kind of were inspired by a number of movies and stuff like that. Howling 3, the style of wolf creature there. They do have some close living relatives, theoretically, that are in that same group as the Thylacines. And Onyx Path, the people that did the W20 book, were planning on publishing a Bunyip tribe book, like the White Hollow's tribe book. But the project ended up getting shelved. Why? We don't know. It could have been something related to when W5 was being developed, but they just ended it. It could be that they didn't get to a point in time they liked with the lore. You know, there's a lot of reasons too, because Onyx Path did a very good job, going back to all werewolf lore, of adapting a lot of older World of Darkness stuff into more modern sensibilities when they were doing the W20 line, and still maintaining the core aspect of existence in a lot of these things. So there could be a million reasons why they never finished it. The White Howler's tribe book they did for those that became the Black Spiral Dances, which is a very interesting tribe book. I talked about in my White Howler's video. I'm just sad they never did the Bunyip one. I would have loved to see what they did with this one. It's a very interesting and unique tribe that basically changed themselves. I think that's where we leave it today. And I think that's a really great place to talk about the Bunyip. They came to a new land and found a way to evolve themselves, to change themselves, to adapt to the land. Not because just the lack of canines and wolves that were there. If they really wanted to, they could have brought wolf creatures to those lands, similar to how the dingoes arrived. And you have to respect that they wanted to be deeply connected to the land of Australia and wanted to be spiritually and physically connected with it in a lot of ways. That's why they chose the Thylacine. That's why they chose that with the help of the Moklet. And that is why, even when the dingo came, they did not change. That is why the Bunyip are so unique and interesting. And it's another good reason why I'm kind of sad we did not get that deeper dive. We may never know. Again, I feel like the nature of W20, or W5, the 5th edition now, we might not get a good answer for anything for Bunyip. They might just be new Vera, something different, something that's not Garou. And I think that's also a sad thing, because the tale of their change and evolution is an important one. They were a people that came from somewhere in Asia, along with these settlers that would become the Aboriginals in Australia, and adapted and changed with them. And I think that's an important part about Garou culture that's lost a little bit when we talk about W5. And it's not necessarily bad in a lot of ways. It's just that they lose some of that interesting aspects of it. That'll be a video for itself maybe one day. But anyway. Thank you for joining me. Check out the rest of my stuff. Make sure if you watch other videos, continue to like them. Make sure, hey, let me know what you think. Would you want to go back and maybe play an older game with Bunyip? Would you see one of these storylines, especially with what's going on in modern day, of Bunyip returning or some kind of thing like that? Or would you continue to go for the apocalyptic storyline and have it be a monster? I personally like the little bit of aspect of hope in there, so that's my direction for it, but I'm interested to see what you guys think about that and think about the Bunyip overall. And how you enjoy their evolution throughout the episode. Check out the rest of my stuff, any other videos I have, and check me out live over on Twitch, over on YouTube. Those are 2 places to see me. And check out my social media link below. And always make sure to check out all the rest of my things like live plays, discussing tabletop, and all that stuff. Anyway, until the next time, I bid all of you out there a deep and wonderful farewell.